DeadCentre, Day 5. "How are you feeling? Any hankering for human flesh?" I asked Grace, when she had fully woken up the next morning, trying to add some levity to the situation with humour. "Like I have the worst hangover, and no, I don't want to eat you," she replied. I'd unbound her hands and feet, and she was slowly drinking some water. "Don't want to eat me?" I waggled my eyebrow at her. "I thought I'd taste pretty good." "You know what I mean, Sam." She sighed. "I don't want to eat anyone." She looked frail. The wound at her neck was covered by a bandage, but I'd seen it when Hazel changed the dressing. It reminded me, horrifically, that humans have layers. I could see the pain in her eyes every time she turned her head. Her eyes squinted as the pain lanced up her jaw. "We don't start hunting for food, we might have to," I joked. I don't think I'd ever in life wanted to live badly enough that I'd consume another human being. I'd also never been tested by that level of hunger, where long pig starts to look like an option on the menu. I hope I never would. "There's plenty of food in the shopping centre," Grace replied, not wanting to entertain the thought of cannibalism. I didn't blame her. "Yeah, the problem is getting it," I told her, adjusting the blanket I'd pilfered from the stockroom the day before. I was in a fluffy red one. Grace was in a grey and white one. The cold wasn't getting any better. It was only going to get colder as we moved further into winter. January was a day or so away. "Can we not lead them away somehow?" Grace asked. It set the gears turning in my mind. They seemed to respond to sight and sound the most. If Daisy could use the tannoy system for the whole centre, we could try and congregate them by playing noise down one of the malls. Possibly, but it's probably safer just to head to the end of the service yard and raid the restaurants via the back doors. I mulled it over aloud. "We need to heat the freezers first. It'll not keep long without power." Grace had worked with food prep before, so she knew her stuff. "Ideally, we could just blockade the service yard entrances, with the vehicles littered around. Then we could have a semi-safe space to access the other parts of the mall." I'd need to delegate. There were too many problems and too few of me. "When you are feeling better, I need you to take charge of the food situation. Just rationing it and keeping it stored. I'll worry about procuring it," I asked her. Cataloguing what was in the cages we pilfered would be a day's work by itself. "Well, no time like the present," Grace replied, as she pushed herself to her feet. She was nowhere near steady enough for that, but I knew better than to try and stop her. I helped her into the hallway, and she got to work. Or more accurately, she put me to work. The first task she set me was getting her a pad and paper to write with. Then she had me call out what we had, how much of it. I didn't mind. It was like doing a stock take. I never minded working with Grace. "Well, we have more than enough food, if we all get eaten by next week," Grace said. Her humour returned with her spirits. "That bad?" I asked. "It's hardly a balanced diet, and we don't have enough toilet paper to deal with how much fibre heavy it is." She smiled at me, like she wasn't suggesting we'd shit ourselves out of toilet paper within a week. She still had a blanket around her shoulders, and looked like she'd regained a little bit of strength. We would need to secure the service yard sooner rather than later. "Don't suppose you know how to hotwire a car?" I asked Grace, as a joke. "Modern ones? No," she replied without looking up from her pad with scribbles on it. Important scribbles, like how long we could survive if we really pushed our limits with the rations. "And you can hotwire non-modern ones?" I shot back, one eyebrow raised. "In theory," she crossed something out on her page. "How do you know that, and why only older cars? Also, how old?" I googled it, because the newer ones have too much other electronics going on, and 90s and older. We might be getting somewhere. "But if you just want them to move, as long as we can disengage the handbrake, you can just push them into position," Grace clarified. And with that, I knew exactly what I was doing today. I'd have to take Ed and Jackie, and maybe a couple of other people, block the two entrances as best I could. It gave us an avenue to raid the restaurants, plus any stock that might still be in the vehicles. I was beginning to seriously regret not Googling more when I had the chance. The entirety of the world's knowledge at my fingertips. and I'd squandered it cycling through cat videos. Now I'd have to rely on people in books. The horror. I'd have to make time and find out what everyone's skill set was. Those who decided to stay anyway. I told Grace the plan. "I'll come too," she replied. My first reaction was to tell her no, it was too dangerous. But then I remembered I'm not her boss, and she'd follow me outside anyway. Plus, I could use all of the help I could get. I rounded up Ed and Jackie, explained the plan to the others, and the new girls decided to help. My guess, it was less scary for them since they'd already been out in the service yard. Ed had made 2 more of his makeshift spears. I really, really wanted one. But I had my hammer, so we handed them to Becky and Taylor. Grace wasn't going to need one, and I'm pretty sure Jackie was more dangerous without one. In fact, she'd taken a length of chain from the stockroom and wrapped it around her knuckles. The plan was simple. The service yard had 2 entrances from the main road encircling the center. We would have to move the biggest cars we could to block them off. We had no chance of moving the larger heavy goods vehicles, unless the drivers had left the keys in them. We creaked open the back door and peered out into the service yard. Nothing, dead or alive. One by one we slipped into the unknown and Hazel closed the door behind us. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. I scanned the area, going car by car, checking to make sure nothing lurked in the dead space between vehicles. There was a slight frost on the tarmac that made tracking easier. So far I could only see an unbroken sheet of grey-white, absent of any footprints. The first entrance was less than 10 meters away from the back door to our hideaway. By some stroke of luck, there were 2 sizable vans really close by. I crept up to the driver's side window and pulled myself up to peer into the window. A face immediately hit the glass inches away from my own, and I recoiled, slipped on the slick road and fell flat on my arse so hard it brought tears to my eyes. "You good?" Grace asked, as Jackie hauled me to my feet. "Yeah, not sure what hurts more, my ass or my pride," I replied. The undead was still crushing its face into the window, leaving a fog on the glass where its hot breath hit the cold pane. A vomit-inducing mix of saliva and blood ran like rivers of pink through the mist. "I'm going to open the door a little, just enough for its head to pop out. Ed, will you do the honors?" I asked. This one felt different. It wasn't a mad struggle of life and death, but more like the ending of a cornered, rabid animal. Ed nodded. I tried the door. It was unlocked. The door was pushed open by the weight of the thing inside, and I had grossly underestimated how hard it would be to hold it back. I dropped my hammer and used both hands and all my strength to keep the door from flying open. Ed's makeshift spear flashed above my head and the frantic strength went slack. He pulled his weapon free and I stepped back, pulling the door open. The now lifeless body fell out onto the road in a crumpled heap. We'd need to find a way to dispose of the bodies. Probably burn them. For now, I dragged it between 2 cars and covered it in some tarp that was used to cover the cardboard bins. The keys were already in the ignition, so we didn't have to push it. I let Ed drive it into position. Driving wasn't my strong suit. We might have to replace it later if it was the only drivable vehicle we found. It would be insanely useful to help ferry supplies from the other end of the yard. I opened the back of the van to see what it was carrying. It was a delivery van, the apocalypse version of a mystery box. There were over 50 parcels of varying sizes, from smaller of a can of pop to bigger than a fridge. It could be useful, it could be nothing. It was certainly a lot of time to sort through it, and right now we didn't have that luxury. The second van wasn't so easy. There was no undead to dispatch, but there was also no keys, so we had to push it into position, with Ed in the driver's seat steering. The 2 vans side by side blocked enough of the entrance that no human body could squeeze through. That did mean that Ed had to climb through the back of the van and out the rear doors. 1 down, 1 more to go. The other entrance was on the other side of the service yard. Now, to put it into context on how long the service yard was, it was at least 150 meters away from the back door, which on an ordinary day was nothing. In the apocalypse, where flesh-eating monsters lurked behind every corner, it's a different story. It's like floating away in space, and every step away from home is the same as watching the umbilical cord that attaches you to the space station get smaller and smaller until it snaps. We all trudged forward to our next target in the loose formation. I took up the lead position with Jackie on my left and Ed on my right. Grace was behind us, and the new girls, Taylor and Becky, were in the back. I kept scanning the frost for signs of people, but the most I saw were the prints of birds and mice. It was something people who've never worked in the dirty side of retail never saw. Any shopping mall, as long as it was large enough, had a rat problem. There was always waste, and discarded food meant rats. We made it to the other side with no one getting eviscerated or disemboweled, so I considered that a win. Even better, there was a heavy goods vehicle already parked in the entrance. The door was open. Hopefully the keys were in the cab. There was zero chance we could push it into position. There were no footprints leading away from the driver's side seat, so I hauled myself up, hammer in hand, ready to strike. Empty. I breathed a sigh of relief. There was no sign of the keys, so that was shit. We would have to block the rest of it as best we could with what we had. "We should check the cargo," Ed said. I nodded, and we went to the rear of the vehicle. I unlatched the door and lifted it a little. My intention was to open it a small amount, but it was one of the newer ones that had pneumatic assistance that practically ripped the door out of my hands as it shot up and disappeared overhead. Something came running out from behind the boxes. It was one of them. I readied my hammer. I was still standing on the ground, so I was only a head and shoulders over the height of the floor of the truck. It started screaming. I hadn't heard one of them scream before. "Hey, hey, hey," I half shouted, half screamed. It stopped running at us, and I could now see it was just a middle-aged bloke. "Jesus fucking Christ," he swore, dropping his weapon that looked like some form of a pry bar, and resting against a stack of boxes. "I thought you were one of them," he followed up with his voice shaky. "Unfortunately, I'm very much alive. My name's Sam. What's yours?" I asked. I never liked introducing myself. Giving my name away felt too personal. However, while I might survive the end of civilization without friends, I wasn't going to be able to rebuild it without them. "Joe. Name's Joe," he replied. "This your truck?" I asked. "Well, I drive it. It's not mine. It belongs to—" He began, but then I saw the world shift in his eyes as he realized that, truthfully, it was his truck now. "I guess it is." "What's in it?" I asked, hoping it was either full of food or a generator. "Mainly stuff for the restaurants up there." He pointed towards the shopping mall where the food court would be. "So food?" I pushed further. "Yeah, got drums of vegetable oil, potatoes, carrots, lots of other stuff. No meat though, that's got to be in the refrigerated truck." I got the impression that Joe was very good at his job, as long as he was given very specific instructions. "You all by yourself?" "Yeah." He sounded sad. "We've got a group of people who are safe on the other end of the yard in one of the shops. Want to stay with us?" I asked. "You sure? You don't mind?" he asked, like he wasn't used to people wanting his company. Not uncommon for long-distance truck drivers. The profession didn't exactly attract the social types. "Not at all. Would you be okay sharing all this food with the group?" "Of course. I can't eat it all myself, and I'm no cook," he told me. "Grand," I told him. Then I explained what we were doing with the service yard. Then he hopped down, closed the door, got in the cab, and drove it so it completely blocked the entrance. After that, he helped us grab some cages from outside our shop, and filled them with as much food as we could. I had thought it might be easier to drive the truck down, but every moment the entrance stayed open was another moment it could all go to shit. Better to be safe than sorry. As we worked loading up the sacks of potatoes, carrots, and other veg, and one barrel of oil, Joe made small talk with Jackie. "You been In here for the past 4 days? She asked. Yep, it's safer in here, he replied. Where did you go to the bathroom? She asked. Jackie was many things. Graceful wasn't one of them. There's a bucket in the far back. Don't go near it, he said, not a hint of shame. I tried to go in the mall yesterday, but one of those things grabbed me. Bit a chunk out of my arm. See? Fuck. I turned and saw a bandage around his forearm. It was stained red-brown like rust where he'd bled through. His shirt sleeves had covered it earlier. I shot a look at Ed, and I could see the same thought in his eyes that tormented my mind. I didn't want to hurt Joe. I also couldn't let all of this food slip through my fingers. I looked at Grace, her eyes full of concern. She'd survived it, and fingers crossed, hadn't turned into one of them. I made a decision. I wasn't going to kill him whilst he was still human. I knew someday it would come to that and I would have to put someone's life and weigh it against the safety of the group. Just not today. We would quarantine him in the office, and keep feeding him antibiotics. Joe, when you got bit, you got infected. Do you feel any fever? I asked him. A little, but it's been cold in here for the last couple of nights. Would it be alright if we kept you in a separate part of the shop for a day or two, just to be sure you don't turn into one of them? I asked, hoping in my heart he wouldn't be upset, or worse, violent. Sure, no problem, he said, with a big smile. I felt like the world's biggest shit. We hauled the food back to the shop. We had 5 cages full and there was still at least another 10 cages worth in the back of the truck. When we got everything squared away, I got Joe settled in the admin office and tied a loop of electrical cord around the door handle to the nearby radiator. It wouldn't stop a human getting out, but it would stop one of them. Then I told the group, Nope, sorry, no, I'm out. I'm not risking my baby any longer. Shannon, the one who had been complaining a day ago, burst out. I sighed. That's fine. I'll get you some food and water. Which way would you like to leave? I asked her. I advised a service yard. There's less of them out there. She thought for a moment, clearly not used to her bluffs being called. The service yard, she decided. Wait a minute. You can't be serious. Think of your baby. Frank spoke up. I am, she snapped at him. Like I said, you are free to leave. But I will not open that door to let you back in. Once you are gone, you're gone, I told her. I would listen to her screaming in agony as he ripped her apart if it meant keeping the group safe. She tutted in response, and I left the room to gather a bag of supplies, giving her all the baby formula we had. I checked in on Angela. Not out of concern, she had just been quiet for a few days. She was at her desk, filing time cards. I left her to it. She'd clearly not been able to grasp the situation, so her mind retreated to the familiar. Once I had a pack ready, we gathered by the back door. Last chance, Shannon, I told her. I wasn't mad, just tired. I knew her and that baby would be violently ripped to pieces within a few days, but I couldn't stop it. Not without putting the whole group at risk. I'll be safer out there than in here with him, she pointed to the admin office. I opened the door and walked her into the service yard. There was a small side gate that let people through. It was bolted shut, so I unlatched it and watched as she walked out into the ruined world. Just a woman pushing her baby in a pram, as if the world hadn't shit the bed. I sighed again, partially in relief, partially in regret. Bolting the gate back up, I headed back inside. I needed a moment, a day to rest, but I didn't have that option. My next task could wait till tomorrow at least. I wasn't going to make any meaningful progress on figuring out how to provide the shop with heat and a place to cook. Grace gave me a hug as soon as I got back in from the cold. It almost made the entire end of the world worth it. Then we started on little jobs, like sorting the food and storing it correctly. After that, I found somewhere to curl up outside the admin office and thought about what we should do tomorrow. If there was a tomorrow. that is the end of DeadCentre, Day 5. Thank you for listening, and I hope you subscribe to stay tuned to the next day.